Tonight we're going to be continuing our study of 1 Samuel, and I've got my notes laid out behind me there. Not that I can see them from here or necessarily can see them if I get back there with them, but I want to cover a total of 5 chapters tonight, if we can, and actually skipping one in the middle, but telling you why as we go along. I'm pacing myself to make sure that we get to the end of 1 Samuel on the Sunday night before the young people will be going over to Kansas City for taking those Bible quizzes and things for LTC. So I set upon this project to cover 1 Samuel in their interest, and then as I'm going a couple of chapters at a time, it didn't take me very long to realize this is not going to get there. And so we're accelerating. And tonight we're covering more space than we've covered at any time in the series, and we'll see how effective we are. Now, a little background, and most of you have been here, so the background is not so essential, but it kind of sets the stage for the things that we're looking at tonight in 1 Samuel. Chapters 15, 16, skipping 17 mostly, and going to 18 and 19. Heretofore, of course, we know that the children of Israel had demanded that they wanted a king. The prophet Samuel had said, that's not good. We need to do it the way that God has always had it. He appointed me as the prophet. He didn't set up a system of kings, and so you ought not to do that, but they insisted more. And God said to Samuel, let them have a king. Samuel took it personally, and God said, don't do that. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Give him a king. And he even selected Saul, who would be the king, and had that explained to Samuel, that he should anoint Saul to be the king. But before that happened, God said, you tell them what to expect. You need them to understand that when you get a king, you're going to have a system that's altogether different. Last Wednesday night here in the auditorium, David was teaching also from 1 Samuel. One of the things that was clear is that the children of Israel did have the responsibility to give their tithe and all of that, but they didn't have any taxation. They didn't have any government that they had to support. And so not having a king, they hadn't been accustomed to all the things that go with having the bureaucracy and the governance that's involved by someone like a king. And he said, you need to understand, you're wanting it, but you're not going to like what you have, because he's going to take a whole lot of your goods. He's going to take some of your best land. He's going to take some of your best cattle, of all of your livestock, and furthermore, he's going to take your daughters to be servants inside his domain, and he's going to draft all your good sons and put them into his army to protect and also to try to get more territory. You're going to have a whole different change in life. And of course, after they got a king, it wasn't very long till they began to see those things. And the last point I believe that we were covering last week was that still with Saul, that Saul was putting into service all their worthy or able-bodied young men. They're seeing the fulfillment of what's going to take and the changes that are going to occur. But in the meantime, King Saul seems to be realizing, I'm out of my league. We talked about the rashness of King Saul last time. He's over his head. But in his defense, he never did run for king. He never did say, hey, I'd make a good king. He's appointed by God. And he is then anointed by the prophet of God, and the people all accept him and embrace him as king because that's the one they have, and he's tall and handsome and strong, and they believe he can lead them to victory in the battles and all those things. But this guy, he was not some forward, self-confident individual. He was, in fact, somebody who was basically shy and not putting himself forward. We didn't touch upon it as we were going by there here a couple of lessons ago, but on the day that they anointed him king, they had to look for him because he had gone and hidden himself in the baggage. I'm not sure what kind of baggage situation there was, but he'd found some warehouse or some kind of a storage place, and he was missing. And when they went looking for him, they finally pulled back some baggage and stuff, and they found there's something really, really odd about that, isn't it? You find your king hiding when it's time for him to get the crown, so to speak. He didn't have the confidence to do it. He was not putting himself forward. And so tonight, I kind of call the lesson, now see we got that up there yet, or are we going to have it up at all? If we don't have it up at all, you won't know how well I'm doing, unless you're reading along. But I call it, you think having a king is a problem? Try being one. Because he's got a mess on his hands and doesn't know what to do with it, and he doesn't handle it well. And he's not going to have it handled very long. We look at chapter 15. Of course, we've had the victories and everything, and he is accepted by everybody. But he starts to get responsibility. And the Lord said, I remember that the Amalekites and in the past, when the children of Israel were coming through the wilderness, the Amalekites were a great problem to my children. And the first main assignment that Saul gets from God is, through Samuel, is you go up and you utterly destroy the Amalekites. They're still around, and they are still a problem. And he said, I want them wiped out for what they did to my children in the past. That's your responsibility. He received the assignment. He went out on duty. But he wasn't strong enough. Whenever he got there, he did win the battle. God saw to it that he won the battle. But he did not utterly destroy the Amalekites. In fact, as he was on his way back home, Samuel is sent to him and asked, God told him to go and ask. He said, did you utterly destroy the Amalekites? And Saul said, yes, I did what you said. I've utterly destroyed the Amalekites. And that's the place where Samuel said, if you utterly destroyed the Amalekites, how come I hear the bleating of sheep and the lowing of cattle? What's that? Oh, he said, we spared some of the best of the animals. We spared some of them because, you see, I thought that would make a good sacrifice to God. So we brought some of their best animals, and we'll use them in sacrifice, and surely God will be pleased with that. That wasn't what he'd been urged to do. His job wasn't a thinking job there. It was a doing job. But he's trying, at this point, he's going to next move to rationalization. But for right now, he's starting to get more and more caught in the situation, and all at once Samuel points out, what about King Agag? How about that king of the Amalekites? Did you destroy him? Well, he said, no, I brought him along. I thought that would show that we really won and we'd embarrass him, and so I didn't utterly destroy him. That's when Samuel had to say, you didn't do what God said for you to do. You have violated the commands of God. And the rationalization started then, and the weakness of the man starts to show up whenever he said, well, it was the people. It wasn't me, it was the people. And they wanted to save these things, and they wanted to spare Agag. And the people, I had to give the people their way. But of course, God had told him what to do, and he was the man where the buck stopped. And he's trying to put off the responsibility on somebody else rather than manning up and being what he's supposed to be. And Samuel said, this is rebellion. You've rebelled against God. This is like witchcraft and disobedience to whatever way you can disobey God. You have done it. God is not looking for you to invent ways to sacrifice. Remember, 2 times already last week we saw that he offered a sacrifice. He played the part of a priest when he wasn't supposed to. He overstepped his bonds. his bounds. And at this point in time, now he's improvising and devising ways that he's going to bring sacrifices to the Lord. And Samuel said, it's not that the Lord is pleased in these sacrifices, burnt offering. What he wants is obedience. What he wants is you to do what he said. You haven't done what he said. And because of that, you are going to lose your kingdom. You will not continue to be king indefinitely because you have failed. And that is made very clear to him. I think it's a heavy next paragraph or so that occurs here, because Samuel we see as the prophet and the priest. We see him as prophet and priest and less as judge. But again, another point David makes on Wednesday night is he also served as a judge. My image of Samuel has to really adjust some to the next thing. Because when they brought forth King Agag, and they tell him that he's going to be killed because of the sin that occurred in his ancestor having oppressed the children of Israel, he starts to try to justify himself with some of the kind of modern things that we hear today. He said, it really wasn't me. I live 100 years later or so. He didn't use those numbers like that. But I wasn't even alive then, perhaps. I had nothing to do with that. Those are my ancestors, and so just be merciful with me, because, you see, I wouldn't have done that if I was there, but that was what they did, and he's trying to pass the buck also. And, you know, we get these arguments today about what lives matter, and this suddenly becomes real current, because Samuel said the lives of those women with children, the lives of those women that your ancestors hacked to death, those pregnant women that they hacked to death, those babies that they hacked to death, he said they mattered then and they matter now. And what happened to them will not have justice until somebody else is hacked. And it didn't have anything to do with the internet, but more with a machete, that kind of instrument. And Samuel, my priest, my prophet, Samuel hacked him to death himself, serving as the judge to carry out what had to be done for justice. Now, you could probably spend the day talking about all the ramifications of the applications of that kind of situation in terms of making it relevant to today's world. And you really would have to use very wide principles, because the law was different than is Christianity. And the system would not be completely parallel in any system. But I had to take a second thought. And I guess I've never said so. I guess I had a little bit of a disappointment that the man Samuel had to do that. It was not what a good godly man like that should have had to do. And he wouldn't have had to do it if the man God appointed to do it had manned up and kept his commandments. Some of the things that fall out on good people today to do still fall out on them because the person who was supposed to do it didn't do it. There must be a lesson we can learn from that. With that having happened, chapter 16 begins immediately to explain that God is moving on. Saul's not going to get to be king for very much longer, and God's moving on, and he's already got the next man in the wings. We know he's going to be King David, but he's just a boy. And whenever God told Samuel, you go down to Bethlehem, same city as Jesus was born in. You go down to Bethlehem and to the house of Jesse. Jesus would eventually be of the seed of Jesse, the seed of David. And there I'll show you who the king is to be. Go to Jesse's house, and you will appoint the king. Now here's a little bit of insight that I don't think I'd ever noticed before about the rashness, the out-of-control aspect of King Saul. But Samuel, whenever God tells him go down to Bethlehem and you're going to appoint another king there, Samuel was afraid. He was afraid to leave Ramah, where he was, because he said, I'm afraid Saul will kill me. He'll find out what I'm doing and I'll be killed on the way. That's how far out Saul had got now, that he'd killed the man of God who'd be doing what God told him to do. And so a plan was devised where God said, you tell him, if you're asked, tell him you're going down to offer sacrifice, and you take some bulls in preparation for sacrifice. When you get there, you sacrifice. You will not have been breaking with what you said you're going to do. And you'll have justification if you need to protect yourself from Saul. You're just doing what the prophet does. And so he went down under a guise if questioned, and I don't think he was questioned, and that plan never had to be executed in any way to protect him. But when he got there, he told Jesse he'd come, that God had told him that he would choose a king from his family. He's still surprising people greatly. But I think Jesse was pretty honored by the concept that one of his sons would get to be king. And in the Jewish fashion, he assumed that it would be his oldest, because the oldest boy always got the point for everything and received inheritance of more things. And he was the one who would get 3/4 of all the inheritance of the stuff that father would leave. And so you just kind of logically connect the dots and say it's going to be the oldest son. So he brought in the oldest son, and God said to Samuel, it's not him. And he went and got another one and brought him, and said, that's not the one. And it kept on, and 6 of them came through, and God said, they're not right. Samuel's befuddled. He said to Jesse, you got any more boys? Well, he said, well, there's the kid, the youngest. We just got him out taking care of the sheep. Apparently the other brothers thought all he's good for. Remember chapter 17, whenever he goes up and he's going to fight Goliath, they said, why don't you just go back, take care of the sheep? They still don't see it either. They said, send for him. They came in, a handsome young man who's very, very young. And I think Samuel was having misgivings about that. He's looking at this mature, older brother, and all the others are older than him. And God said, this is not an exact quote in the first part, but he said, there's something you need to get here. Don't look at him like men look at each other. Don't look at him as a mere man. You look at him like I look at him. Here's the rule we're familiar with. He said in verse 16, verse 7 of 16, he said, man looketh upon the outward appearance. Remember, you chose Saul. He was tall, head taller than all the other men. He was handsome. People look at all that, and that impresses them. But God does not look at the outward appearance, but rather he looks at what's in the heart. And that's what's always important to God. And he said, this is a boy with whom I can do something. This is a boy who's got a spirit that's good and right. And I've had this ruffian, I've had this rash man, who we see what he's done. I want to start over with this young man who's pliable, manageable, whose heart is right, and that's what I want. And so David is selected and David is anointed, but the secret is kept, of course. He goes on with what he's been doing. Chapter 17 tells the story, of course, of his great victory over Goliath. because of the need to execute speed here in what we're doing, and because I believe that that one chapter is probably the one that we all know better than any other one, and the one with which our young people would already be most familiar anyway. I'm going to accelerate beyond and skip 17. Someday we'll come back, and I've got a sermon about fighting giants in our life, and to use that as the basis, and I'll go back and we'll cover that part of 1 Samuel then, whenever that is. But right now I want to go on into chapter 18. There's a situation that evolved over time here where you have to say, well, that's the providence of God. Because on the one hand, David has been anointed as the next king. He's not been made the king. He's just been chosen, and the due process is beginning. Saul's still the king. As we go on, we'll see that David always honored that in times and ways that were absolutely amazing, that he would have respected him as king in spite of all that happened and all that was going to happen. Still, David always respected that. By the providence of God, David became friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. And through the acquaintance with Jonathan and being his friend, he happened to be, Jonathan was aware of some talents and so forth that David had. And Saul has, he's probably got more strain on him now than ever. And he's reached a point where he's behaving, at least, like a person who's to some degree mentally ill. And he has these fits of depression. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a doctor of any kind, of course, and so I guess it's inappropriate for me to diagnose. But it seems to me it's like he's having fits of depression. And they call in David, who is good in playing the harp or the lyre. And whenever he gets into that demoralized state, David comes in and he plays pretty things for him, and it helps peace. Now, I don't know if I've got mental illness, but when we're back where we used to live in Alabama, and Betty's got her baby grand over there in the music room, and I'm sitting in my recliner and I'm real tired, there's nothing I'd rather have than her sitting at the piano playing, just so I can close my eyes and listen and rest. The only reason I bring that in at this point is I think that's what was happening with Saul, that he could just kind of forget all of that pressure and stuff that he couldn't handle, didn't know how, and was frustrated about. And for a little while, he could have quiet time with that music, and it would soothe his anxious soul, and then he could move on. He needed that often enough that they kept David as an armor bearer so that he'd be close to him all the time and available when those things occurred. And I have no idea how often it might have occurred, but it just so happened that one of the times when David was playing, Saul got really in a rage. Now, in the meantime, David had become a little more than an armor bearer. When you get a young man like that, he starts to really show himself, and you can't miss his talent. And so he just kind of grows in spite of himself because of who he is. And David grew from being an armor bearer to being a captain of the armies. And he's in control of so much, and whenever they go out on raids or defend the people or anything, it's David who is the helm, and he's winning over and over again. He's not having any losses. Every time he's leading, he's winning, and now the people start to really brag on him, as we would put it today, and they are commending David, and they start to suggest that he's killed many more. He's a greater military leader than King Saul is, and King Saul's psyche is not ready to accept that. Now he's in one of these depressed situations, and there's the man over there playing the harp that everybody is looking up to instead of him. He just grabbed his spear, and the scripture says his intent was that he would pin the man to the wall with the spear. And he threw it across the room, and he missed. Well, David was pretty intelligent, so he ran. He got out of there and escaped. In time, though, he's back and did it some more. And in time, David had another one of those fits, and ultimately he had to just go. But in the meantime, Saul had kind of thought, I'm going to work this kid a little bit to my advantage. And he knew that if I'm going to destroy him, I got to keep him close to me. And I haven't had much luck with throwing spears at him, so let's try something else. He said, I'm going to get control of him by, I'll let him be my son-in-law, or at least I'll tell him I'll let him be my son-in-law. I'm going to give him my beautiful oldest daughter, Mira. He said, you can have Mira as your wife. It's kind of like Saul's thinking, who wouldn't want that? And he got his servants to even look about how Saul is. He's really esteeming you because he's chosen you to be his son-in-law. Who wouldn't want to? You can't ignore how well he's treating you and the opportunities that are there. There's no indication that David resisted that. That's kind of in a kingship. It's kind of not something a guy would be able to do. And it looks like it's moving that way. And then when the time came, good old Saul changed his mind and gave that girl to somebody else. But he said, I got a deal for you, though. I got another daughter. I'll give you Michal. Well, it just so happened that Michal already loved David anyway. Doesn't say he loved her, but maybe there was a relationship that was starting to work in their minds, and so nobody resists that. And she became his wife. Things are going along there till, well, I forgot that little detail, and I can't go into a whole lot of detail about it. But David said, I won't even require a dowry. You won't have to bring any money to the table. When I go to India, sometimes I have attended pre-marriage celebrations, and there are daddies over there who have to pay like the equivalent of $4,000 or $6,000, which is probably 2 years' salary if he's got a job, as dowry for his daughter to get married. Daughters aren't very popular in India. Because you got to do a dowry. If you get sons, they're going to receive the dowry. See, and so that's political and cultural, and it's not any of our business really. But I attended those places where here's a guy that has really, really saved up to buy 4 Coca-Colas to give to us as we come as his guest. And I don't want to drink his Coca-Cola because I know he worked all day or 2 days or something for the money, and I don't like or want a Coca-Cola. But cultural practices, you got to drink his Coke so you don't offend him. Dowry can really be a problem for people who are poor. But he said, you can have the king's daughter and you don't have to pay a dowry. It's just one thing. I want you to go down and attack the Philistines, and you bring me back proof, certain kind of proof, that will remove any doubt, but that you killed 100 of them, and that'll serve as your dowry. And then David found out that really was a plot, because Saul felt sure if he goes down in there and attacks all those people, he's the one that's going to get killed, and I won't have to go through with this promise, and they'll get rid of him for me instead of me having to. When David found out about that, he went down and killed 2 and brought the 200, not 100, but 200 he'd asked for, and brought the proof, I've killed them all. And he got the bride. She did love him, and whenever Saul is plotting the next time that he will definitely destroy David, he slips away because Michal told him, Dad's going to destroy you. He's sending men to kill you. And she let him out through some escape route, and he's gone. But whenever he was gone, she took some kind of an image. I don't know whether it was some kind of idol kind of thing, or if it's just something that was shaped like a human body, and she covered it up in the bed, and she put something like a goat hair pillow there where the head would be, and she has the guys of, when they came looking for him, she said, he's asleep. And then why is he not getting up? Well, he's sick. They went back and told Saul, he's sick. He said, bring him here on his bed. They went and got the bed and brought that dummy up to the other dummy, and then he found out, and he was mad at his daughter. And she'd learned some things from her dad, and she said, it wasn't my idea, David put me up to it. And so in the meantime, David goes to where Samuel is, and the two of them escape to another location, and they are now in hiding so that they are protected in the end part of that chapter situation. Let me look here and make sure if I think at that point I'm to chapter 19. Yes, just a little more here. This part is almost humorous, but it's too sad to make any fun of. After Saul finds out that David and Samuel both have gone and hidden, and where they are, he sends some of his soldiers down, some of his representatives, to get them and bring them to him. But the men that he sent down to grab them and bring them back to him, before they got there, started prophesying. They got converted on the way, so to speak. And so instead of going down and getting them, they go down and they're preaching, and they're joining up with what Samuel is doing. So he sent some more. And before they got there, they started prophesying. And so he sent some more. Before they got there, they started prophesying. And so he went himself. And before he got there, he started prophesying. And then he got so carried away with this whole thing, the scripture says that 3 days and nights he was naked in the city. This is not the first generation that thought their leader had lost his mind, folks. I'll just leave that right there. But that's where we find Saul at this point in time. After all that's occurred, he is in a state of lostness and confusion and mixed up, and he knows he's going to lose the kingdom. He just doesn't know when, and he doesn't know how, and he knows who's going to take it, and it's out of his control. And the madman is mad, and now he's beside himself. We always try to close these series of chapters with the takeaways. I got 4 that I wanted from these chapters. One is that it proves that no leader can replace God. And that's what Samuel told the people to begin with. You're going to get a king, but he can't replace God. And then later, in our lesson last week, we saw that he was not able to take the place of what God had done in terms of protection and care. They never could, and no one ever can. And our government and our time and our nation In our culture, we need to understand that our president, our Congress, our military, no one can protect us from the evil one. God can. A lesson that I think is wasted on lots of people these days. And second, that men cannot ultimately alter God's plan. Although Saul is trying again and again to kill David, David is going to be king. It is in God's plan, and it will happen. It's one of the faith-giving incidents that would cause us to understand if Jesus said the gates of hell shall not prevail against his church, it's going to stand forever. There may be weak times, and there may be slow times, and there may be times where it's difficult and persecution is strong, but it's going to survive, and when judgment comes, the church will be there. Third point, power does not a wise leader make. You can give somebody power. You can't give him wisdom. You can give him prestige and honor. You can't give him wisdom. You can't protect him from himself. And last, God is always working out his will for men. Whether it's putting David and Jonathan in a situation where they become friends, or Michael and David becoming husband and wife, or the right people in the right place, or causing the messengers from Saul to prophesy, God's always working out his plan. For ages and ages, he's been waiting for the church to come into existence, and now he's waiting for the church to fulfill the mission, to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And someday God is going to realize the fulfillment of his plan through his church, just like he intended to all the time. We'll conclude with the end of chapter 19 and offer an invitation, Lord willing. We're going to cover about 3-4 lessons next week, and we will be at the end of it on the fourth Sunday of this month, just before the young people leave. We will have covered all that. If you're subject to the invitation of the Lord tonight for any reason, we'll not spend a lot of time iterating that, but if you want to be a child of God, come and we'll teach you how. If you already know what you should do, we'll help you do that. If you're a part of the kingdom, you've erred, drifted from your responsibility to the Lord, we'll pray with you about it. Or if you've just got trouble in your life and struggles and you need the prayers of the church, we'll pray with you about those things. But come while we stand and sing.